Thanks, Dan. It's always good to see a lot of familiar faces, Julian and Gibbons and Manny, the Sorte. I thought most of you probably know I left the state newspaper back in May. I took a buyout from the state, and I'm now working, as Dan said, on completing a book that I've been kind of putting together for the last couple of years. And the working title of the book is No Bull, the real story of the Durham Bulls. And it's been a fascinating project. But what I thought I'd do today is kind of reflect on the 46 years that I spent in the journalism and newspaper business a little bit, and start out by telling you how I got into it. It's kind of an unusual story. When I was 14 and living in Cheyenne, Wyoming, my dad was a radio play-by-play announcer for the University of Wyoming, and he got me a job with the Associated Press, and I would go in on weekends and take calls from around the state. Well, in the state of Wyoming at the time, there were only 17 high schools in the entire state. So each high school, instead of having a reporter out on the scene, each high school, and usually the head coach would call the Associated Press with the results, and I would take them over the phone and write up little 1, 2, 3 paragraph stories at age 14. Well, during basketball season, my first year with the Associated Press, there was a little tiny high school outside of Laramie called Rock River High School. Rock River was a town of about 150 people, and the high school had 20-some kids. Rock River, apparently this first year, had a pretty good basketball team. And the director of the Associated Press said, well, you know what, you've been doing this all during the fall, and you're now during the fall, and now you're doing it during the spring. I'll let you vote each week in the high school poll. Well, I kind of took a liking to Rock River High School, so my first poll that I filled out, I voted Rock River #1 in the state, in the Class D level, which was the lowest level of competition. And Rock River continued to win during the season, and by the end of the season, Rock River was undefeated and ranked #1 in the state. Everybody else had joined my vote, voting them #1 in the state. The reason I liked Rock River initially was because every player on the Rock River team had the same last name. They were all brothers or cousins. They were all from the same family. So the season went along, they went undefeated, and it came time for the tournament. And the director for the Associated Press said, well, you know what? We really ought to send you over to Laramie from Cheyenne to cover the tournament. Of course, I was 14 years old. I told him, how am I going to do that? Well, my mother drove me over to the tournament. I stayed in a hotel for the first time, and my mother and I attended the tournament, and I covered it as the member of the Associated Press at age 14. Well, I wish I'd had a camera. I wish I'd had a phone at the time, a cell phone, to take a picture of the coach when I went up and introduced myself as the reporter from the Associated Press who's been pumping up Rock River all year. He just couldn't believe that I was 14 years old and was doing that. So that was my introduction into sports writing and the business that I eventually got into. Along the way, I've had the great fortune and privilege to meet just hundreds, maybe thousands of interesting characters, people, and I thought I'd share a little bit I'll do some name dropping if that's allowed. One of the people that I probably most treasured, when I was a sophomore in high school, my family had then moved from Wyoming to Salisbury, North Carolina. And Salisbury is the home of the National Sportscasters and Sports Writers Association. And they hold their annual convention every year in Salisbury. And as part of the thing, they have to go to Greensboro or Charlotte to pick up all the dignitaries and bring them to Salisbury. Well, I was a member of the Key Club at Salisbury High School, and the Key Club, as one of its projects, provided drivers for the National Sportscasters and Sports Writers Association. And the first year that I got to drive, I drove to Greensboro, and they said, you're going to pick up a special guest. We're not going to tell you till you get there who it is. And I went to the table where the NSSA was, and it was Jesse Owens. Can you imagine? At age 16, I got to pick up Jesse Owens at the Greensboro airport and drive him to Salisbury. I was so speechless, I couldn't even say hello to him. We spent the entire hour basically listening to the radio because I couldn't speak, and he didn't know who I was. But it was a privilege to be able to just be in the car with such a dignitary, and it kind of sparked my desire to get into the sports writing field and get into journalism. Just in that one meeting with Jesse Owens. A little later on, when I was working in Durham, they were, of course, had the Durham Bulls baseball team came back to Durham in 1980. And at the time, they were an Atlanta Braves farm team, and their farm director at the time was Hank Aaron. Well, Hank Aaron was just 4 or 5 years removed from playing in the major leagues, so he had a very difficult job of being both the farm director and the home run king, the greatest home run hitter of all time. He couldn't just go into Durham and scout the team and see what the players were like. And so what Hank did was he relied on the local sports writers to kind of fill him in on who was out carousing at night, and who the dedicated ball players were. So it was my great fortune covering the Durham Bulls that any time that Hank Aaron came into Durham, he would call me and we would go out to eat breakfast, or we would go out on long jogs, or whatever he wanted to do. And he would basically pick my brain on members of the team. And little did they know, or the manager know, that I was the informant for the farm director of the Braves. But the best thing about it was I got to develop this sort of friendship with Hank Aaron. Yes, he was using me to some extent, but we did develop some sort of friendship to the point where when I would attend spring training games in Florida, he and I would go out on jogs together. One time we were out on a jog in Durham, and we're moving along pretty good. We're running around the Duke West Campus wall, and this tells you a little bit about Hank Aaron and what kind of figure he is. We had 2 gentlemen pull up in their car and stop and ask Hank Aaron for his autograph while we're jogging. And Hank, to his credit, said, you know, he would love to, but he didn't have a pen on him or a piece of paper. And besides the fact he was jogging, but he was very nice about it. Another time we went to he said, I'll go out to breakfast with you, but normally we would just meet in his hotel room because he didn't like to go out in public. But he said, well, I'll go out to breakfast with you this time, but you have to let me pick out where we're going to eat. So we drove around Durham in my car until we found the perfect place where he thought no one would recognize Hank Aaron. So we go into this little ham and egger near the Duke campus, and we eat breakfast, and sure enough, not one single person came up to him and said, are you Hank Aaron? Until we were getting ready to leave, and the poor waitress said, are you Hank Aaron? And he looked at her straight in the eye and he said, no, that's not me. I look like him. People tell me that all the time, but that's not me. And we walked out of the restaurant. Another person I had the great pleasure to meet, Arthur Ashe. He was in Durham for some sort of minority speaking engagement and at North Carolina Central University. And Arthur Ashe, out of the goodness of his heart, agreed to a one-on-one interview with me, this young reporter in Durham who didn't even know what kind of questions to ask. But he gave me an hour-and-a-half interview at North Carolina Central University. One of the nicest, most humble men I've ever met, and it's everything you've ever read about him is absolutely true. Just a true gentleman and good man. The next person I was going to talk about, I covered the Durham Bulls from 1980 through 1987, and they had a manager in the early years by the name of Allen Mitchell Edward George Patrick Henry Gallagher. His parents in San Francisco apparently wanted lots of kids, never could have them. When he finally came around, they gave him all the names that they wanted to give their kids. And as if he didn't have enough names, they called him Dirty Al. Now, anybody with that many names and that kind of nickname, you know he was a character. And let me tell you, Dirty Al Gallagher was a character. He played for the San Francisco Giants and the California Angels for about 6 years, and then he went into managing in the minor leagues. And Dirty Al had this, I'll just tell you one little story about him. Dirty Al had this nice way of welcoming new reporters to to his fold. I had been covering the team for a couple years while he was there, and every time that a new reporter came in, and maybe a new TV person or a new radio person or somebody who was just dropping in to interview him, he would gather us around in his little cubicle that was called a manager's office, and he would proceed to conduct the interview, and everything would be going along fine, and he would always wait until that new reporter either looked somewhere else or was looking at their feet or looking at their notepad or looking in their camera. And Dirty Al, I don't remember ever seeing him without tobacco in his mouth. Well, he would proceed, when the person was unsuspecting, to splatter tobacco juice all over the shoes of that reporter. And I can't tell you how many reporters walked out of those interviews with tobacco stains all over their shoes and the bottom of their pants. That was Dirty Al. Another interesting character, maybe character is not the right word, interesting person that I ran across was Dean Smith, who you probably all know as the great North Carolina basketball coach for many years. Dean Smith was the smartest man, the most intelligent man I've probably ever met. Complete genius. He was so smart that he couldn't speak in complete sentences. And it was a habit of his that he never could kick, I'm sure, to the day he died. He was incapable of speaking a complete sentence. And I always figured the reason was, when you asked him a question in an interview, his mind worked so fast, and he was thinking of not only why you asked the question, what your motive was, what your angle was, but how he was going to answer it, and how it was going to lead to the next question that he was going to answer and go through the same process. Because whenever you asked him a question, it would be a scattershot answer all over the place, and rarely did you get the answer you were looking for. But the man was brilliant. He probably did more in terms of innovation for the game of basketball than any man that maybe in the history of the game. A brilliant man. He also was averse to public speaking. He really did not like to public speak, probably for the same reason that he wasn't good at speaking complete sentences. But one time I went to a speaking engagement of his, and he got to the Q&A part, and he said, "I'm not going to do Q&A. I don't do question and answers. I'm sorry, my speech is done. I'm out of here." And somebody asked him, "Well, why is that?" And he said, early on, as a coach at North Carolina, he went to a Rotary club or something similar to that, and he opened it up for questions, and he asked the person, a young woman, a young girl down in front, for the first question, and she said, "Coach Smith, can you tell me what time it is?" He said, so from then on he decided he wasn't going to answer questions. Another fascinating person I ran into along the way, Mike Krzyzewski, the Duke basketball coach, longtime Duke basketball coach. Another tremendously intelligent, caring, kind person who was, where Dean Smith was one of the great innovators in the game, Mike Krzyzewski has earned his reputation as the most creative and adaptive coach I've ever seen. That man has changed his style of coaching over his 20-some years, probably 5, 6, 7, 8 times. He changes from year to year, but he's smart enough to know how to do it and gets away with it. Brilliant man. Jim Valvano, of course, I ran into quite a bit when he was coaching at NC State. My favorite story about Jim Valvano, we're out to eat at a restaurant one night, one afternoon, and Jim gets ready to leave, and you know how they used to have, I don't know if they still have them, little jars or plastic containers at the checkout, and you drop in a coin or two and you pull out a mint. It's on an honor system. Well, Jim Valvano was making at the time what was considered a great salary. He was probably close to $1 million a year, but he was one of the most highly paid coaches in the game for good reason. And we're walking out of this restaurant, and he grabs a handful of mints and puts them in his pocket and shakes the thing and just keeps on walking. I said, "Jim, you didn't put any money in there." He said, "Oh no, old Italian trick." Bobby Bowden, when I was working in Tallahassee, got to know Bobby Bowden pretty well. He, one of the most genuine, kind people. He was in the wrong profession. He was too nice to be a college football coach. But Bobby Bowden, one time I had a meeting with him in his office, and we got done with the meeting. It's the only time in all of my career in sports writing we're walking out of the meeting, and Bobby Bowden patted me on the butt. I have no idea why. I guess it's because that's what they did with the players and the other coaches, but he patted me on the butt, and I turned around and looked at him, and then I think he realized, oh, wait a minute, I'm not supposed to do that, am I? Richard Petty, I happened to interview one time in his trailer in Darlington, and Richard Petty was the only person, as we were leaving, he said, well, son, do you have everything you need? And I said, I think so. And he said, well, thanks, Podna, for coming by. The only person that ever called me Podna after an interview. I'll conclude with my favorite story. You've probably heard it before, since I've spoken here before. I got to meet Yogi Berra once. Yogi Berra, as you all know, was one of the great New York Yankee players of all time. He's a Hall of Famer. Yogi Berra also, admittedly, he still admits to this day, was not very attractive. Yogi, in fact, he even says he's one of the ugliest men on earth, but that's beside the point, except you need to know that in the telling of the story. So Yogi, I'm down in West Palm Beach, Florida in spring training, and I'm on assignment from Baseball America magazine to work on some of their story. I don't even remember what it was about. And they said, well, Yogi Berra's in town coaching the Yankees. Can you go by and get a comment from him? So I said, sure, I can do that. So I go to the guard underneath the stands at the West Palm Beach little stadium there, Municipal Stadium, and I said, I need to see Yogi Berra, and he said, oh sure, it's the second door on the left, just go on in, he's real good about it. So I go to the second door on the left, and I open the door, and there is Yogi Berra in all his glory, naked. He was naked. And the worst part is, I said, Yogi, I can come back. And he said, no, that's okay, come on in. So I interviewed Yogi Berra for a good 10 minutes, and he never did put any clothes on. I tried my darndest not to look up from my pad. But that was my meeting with Yogi Berra. So I've had a great run in the newspaper business. Got to meet all these fascinating people and write about all of these different events, and but I'll tell you this, I got just as much pleasure out of, I went to cover the Super Bowl, I've covered the World Series, NCAA basketball championships. I got just the same pleasure out of working on a story about C.A. Johnson High School and the problems they have in trying to field the football team and get their kids involved in athletics that I did in any of the other events along the way. But I'll open up for questions. I don't know how much time we have left.
You got about 4 minutes.
Okay.
Ron, what is the future of the daily newspaper?
Well, okay, the question was, what's the future of the daily newspaper? I should tell you from the outset that as part of my buyout with the state newspaper, I can't say anything disparaging about the state newspaper. I don't know that that precludes saying anything disparaging about the industry. I hope not. We're dying. Newspapers are dying, and it's a sad fact. I don't know what the average age in this room is. Most of the people in this room probably read newspapers growing up and probably still read newspapers. But below this age, they aren't reading newspapers. My son is a prolific reader. He's 21 years old. He'll read books galore, magazines. He will not read a newspaper. It's just not part of their lives. And that's unfortunately what's happened to the newspaper business. They're trying to make a go of it on the internet and through that service. I have my doubts. My guess is that maybe within most of our lifetimes, we won't see newspapers, particularly in the larger cities. We may see it still in the smaller cities where they can tailor their needs just to the local community. But yeah, it's a dying industry. We're going the way of the railroads. Sad but true.
Did you ever interviewed Cal Ripken Jr. or did it?
No, never ended Cal Ripken Jr.
I miss your stories.
I'm sorry?
I miss your stories.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. It was,
Interesting parts.
I'm sorry?
Don't you get interesting parts?
Yeah, I think that's really what I tried to do mostly as a columnist, was to capture the human interest element in sports. And it kind of was the driving force behind most of my stories. Unfortunately, I'm probably remembered for more for the controversial stories than I am for the human interest stories, but that's just the way it works. That's probably what sold more newspapers too, so I can't complain about that.
So when do you think it will be done?
My book, I hope, will be done. I hope to have it actually written, the written part of it done by the end of August, and hope to have it published by Christmas. The book publishing business is a lot different now than what it was even 10 years ago. Unless you're a really known author, John Grisham or whoever, known author, you don't just get a contract to go write a book. In fact, you have to basically write the book and then go sell yourself and sell the book to a publisher and hope it gets published. So I may be writing this in vain. I hope not. It's
On Amazon, you always put it on Amazon.
yeah, and there's all kinds of ways to self-publish too. There's definitely no money to be made in any of it, but it's more labor of love, and I think it's a really good story. It's not just about the Durham Bulls as much as it is. 1980 was the first year that pro baseball came back to Durham, similar to what's happening in Columbia, and the city of Durham just went crazy over this franchise and the team. And for the first time, the Duke community got involved in Durham. And since then, it kind of sparked a rebirth in minor league baseball. And it also sparked a revitalization of Durham and downtown Durham. I don't know when the last time any of you have been to Durham. It's a thriving community. Durham at 1980 was the armpit of the Research Triangle. And today, it is the cool place to live, the cool place to go. It's this incredible downtown area. They have a 5-star hotel downtown. They have 5-star restaurants everywhere. It's just an amazing transformation of a city. And were the Durham Bulls the sole reason? No, but they certainly were a spark to all of that revitalization. Terry, you don't have a question? You usually have some kind of.
No, I will ask you, since you brought it up, following up on what you just said, do you think that the difference being Durham's Duke's baseball program not being what Carolina's program is here, so do you think that the future of minor league baseball here votes as well as it did in Durham?
Yeah, I don't think that's a factor at all. It wasn't in Durham, and it wasn't because Duke's baseball team wasn't very good. It was more because the Duke students found a place nearby campus to go and drink beer and enjoy a baseball game at night, and the college season was virtually over. I think there's virtually no overlap whatsoever in Columbia. Really, the University of South Carolina baseball program is catered to the 7,000 season tickets they sell each year, to the 7,000 members of the Gamecock Club. Well, how many people are in the city of Columbia, in the surrounding area? What are we up to, 700,000? That's 900, I mean, that's 500 and some thousand other people who have an interest in going out for a nice night of entertainment during the summer that doesn't have anything to do with the University of South Carolina and its baseball program. I just don't see any overlap. For one thing, the seasons barely overlap at all. But the South Carolina baseball program is a pretty select audience versus appealing to the general city of Columbia. The other thing about the baseball team coming back, to me it's one of the first things one of the few things that the city of Columbia is doing for the city of Columbia and its citizens. You think back through its history, at least since I've been here, almost everything is done for Fort Jackson, for state government, for University of South Carolina, but there are very few things that are done just for Columbia and its citizens. And I think this is one of the things that could really spark a revitalization or an expanding revitalization of downtown Columbia. I hope. That's the hope.